Hello, everybody. This is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. Today, I have one of my favorite monthly contributors that comes on the program, Dan Pilla. He's an IRS expert, and he's going to be talking about what's happening in the state of Mississippi and why this might be a trend that we're starting to see across all states, which will be a good thing. So he'll be talking about that and talking about why you may not be able to use your passport if you have IRS debt. Something else that you really want to, that you need to be made aware of. But if you got any questions for me, you can go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and there's a link at the top of the page. It says Ask Prudent Money. Just tap on that link, and we'll get you taken care of. That's all at the website, prudentmoney.com. Enjoy the program.
Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, a domino effect that is actually a good thing. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, there's a lot of change occurring right now in our country. Could we start seeing it at the state level when it comes to personal income taxes? IRS expert Dan Pilla is here to weigh in. Dan, how are you doing today?
I am well, Bob. How are you doing?
Doing good. You know, it is 100 degrees in May here in Texas today. I can't wait to see what the summer brings.
I got to tell you something, Bob. I'm actually in Galveston, and so I'm experiencing the Texas heat myself.
Okay, so well, that's good. It's a good thing that you came down to the nation of Texas. Check out things.
The nation of Texas. Your Texans are something else.
Hey, you know, we've got to keep it real, don't we? So,
yeah.
Hey, look, speaking of keeping it real, let's talk a little bit about, just real quick before we get into what is going on in Mississippi. Let's talk a little bit about the tariffs. Last month, that was a brand new thing, and all the information was coming out. We talked about it in pretty good detail. What's your views on it now, 30 days later?
Well, I think what's happening, Bob, is the Trump plan, I think, is being revealed, and that is the idea was to force these countries to the table. We talked about this last time, the idea of using tariffs as a negotiation strategy to force these countries to the table to talk about their own tariffs. I don't believe for a minute that any responsible person in the Trump administration thinks that we're going to fund the federal government, the United States government, on tariffs. I didn't believe that from the start.
Sure.
I don't believe it now. And I think it's obvious that what they wanted to do with these tariffs was force other countries to rethink their tariff policy on the importation of U.S. goods into these foreign nations. I think that's what it's all about.
Well, it's an ongoing saga. I wish they would stop doing the 90-day hold and just get to work and get these things done.
Well, and I agree with you because it does create some confusion. But the fact of the matter is, historically, it takes a long time for two nations to negotiate their tariff policies. You know, it's historically something that doesn't happen in 30 or 60 or even 90 days. Sometimes it takes years to get these things figured out.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Mississippi. You call this a really good thing. You referred to it in your newsletter as could this be the next domino to fall? First state in 45 years to abolish its individual income tax. Talk a little bit about the Build Up Mississippi Act.
Yeah, Bob, that very simply is a law that was passed by the Mississippi legislature, signed by the governor of the state of Mississippi, that repeals over time their income tax and actually ratchets down over over a little bit faster period of time their state's sales tax. So what Mississippi is doing, quite simply, is they are phasing out their income tax. I don't like the length of time that they're doing it in, but they are phasing out their income tax and getting themselves into a position where state government is funded by consumption taxes.
So there's 8, including Texas, other states that have done this. If you compare the two, we'll just call it a tax model or tax strategy. Which one over time is the most beneficial, and why?
Well, are we talking about the phase-out strategy, Bob? Is that what you're talking about?
Talking about just in overall what Mississippi's doing, changing the way that they get revenue. I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, there's 2 ways to phase out an income tax model into a consumption tax model, and the 2 ways to do that are the light switch. You just turn off the switch on the income tax, you turn the switch on the consumption tax, and you have this very fast changeover. The other way is a long-term, well, it could be short-term, long-term, or medium-term phase-out, but Mississippi is using the phase-out strategy where they're actually ratcheting down their income tax in, basically a quarter of a point at a time over about 12 years, as opposed to turning the switch off on the income tax.
So, do you believe that the states could actually use the flip the switch model and do the transition? It seems like a state like Illinois, for instance, a state that's in a lot of financial trouble it seems like it would be tough to just make that switch to another tax model like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the fact of the matter is, because of the nature of the income tax, where you have, 3 years to audit a tax return, you've got, at the federal level, you got 6 years to collect a tax, 10 years to collect the tax. The state of Minnesota, for example, you got 6 years to collect the tax, but that can be renewed. And so you've got a situation where you've got these look-back laws, these carryback periods for carryback losses. For example, you can go back 2 years in some cases, longer in other cases, depending on the situation. So you've got all of that stuff up in the air over the period of time that you're trying to phase into a new system. So I think it would be difficult to just turn the light switch off on the income tax and move to a broad-based consumption tax to handle all the tax collection strategies that need to be handled. But the fact of the matter is, I also don't think that it's a good idea to do it over a 12-year period of time, Bob. I am very much in favor of the idea of doing it as fast as you possibly can, because the concern that you have in a situation where you're phasing out over a long period of time is you've got not potential changes. You will have changes in the legislature over that period of time and potential changes in legislative philosophy. You will have gubernatorial changes during that period of time and potential changes in gubernatorial philosophy. And while those things can't be predicted, Bob, the changes can be predicted, but not the philosophy. You don't know what direction the voters are going to take the government in let's say 5 or 10, and certainly not in 12 or 15 years. And so as a result of that, you're running the risk that you get 6, 8, 10 years into something like this, and then all of a sudden the future legislature decides, we're going to do it differently. We're going to unravel all that stuff we've been working on here all these years, and we're just going to continue. We're going to reverse strategy here, so to speak.
Well, what's interesting, if you think about the amount of detail that goes into a switch like this, and the amount of being prepared and getting things right, and the complexity of all the moving parts, you think you got to look at a situation like that and go, what could go wrong? I mean, quite a bit could go wrong.
Well, no question about it, Bob. 100 things can go wrong, and again, when you have new legislatures stepping up. Certainly every 2 years, sometimes every 4 years, depending on who you're electing. But the fact of the matter is that's what throws the wild card into the mix. That's what gets you into a position where you just don't know anymore.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Dan Pilla is here to talk about what's happening at the state level. And do you think we're starting to see a trend of this type of movement with states going this direction?
Well, yeah, I think there is a bit of a trend, and as a matter of fact, I was hoping to see such a trend. As I was working at the federal level to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and the Internal Revenue Code and go to a national retail sales tax, it became obvious to me, this is in the late 90s now, that Congress was never going to do the right thing for the right reason, and come to realize, for example, that the federal income tax system we have now is a disaster and needs to be changed. They weren't going to come to that conclusion. I believed then, and I believe now, that the income tax was going to have to collapse under its own weight, and I think we're starting to see some movement in that direction. But the real revelation to me, Bob, was that in order for this to happen at the federal level, the states have to change their systems one at a time, and then we can send the message after multiple states have done it, and if multiple states have turned their economies around as a result of it, that message can be sent to Congress that this really is the best tax policy that there is for raising revenue. And so now we've seen Mississippi do it. There's a move in Kentucky to do the same thing. Georgia's been talking about doing the same thing in their state. Iowa is talking about some significant tax reforms there. The state of Wisconsin has toyed with this. There's no specific proposal in Wisconsin to go forward with it, but there has been some noise made there. And so, of course, we got South Dakota and Tennessee and Florida and Texas and a number of others that don't have a state income tax anyway, which, by the way, those states' economies are always more stable given the economic ups and downs that we go through. In other words, their economies don't sink quite as deeply in the down periods, and they perform better in the up periods. States with no income tax, that is, perform that way, versus states with an income tax, which have deeper downs and shallower highs. And so if we can get more and more states functioning under this model, then you've got the capacity to demonstrate to Congress that this is not an experiment. It's the income tax that's the experiment. And the income tax is the failed experiment. The consumption tax is the better model and always has been.
Yeah, I guess when you look at the facts, 45 years since the last state to do this, it would seem like that indicates that from a political standpoint, it's like a field full of landmines, and they want to be as careful as possible not to screw something up.
Yeah, there's no question they want to take their time and get it right, and I agree with that, and it needs to be thought out. There's no question about that. But as I said already, it's the income tax that's the experiment. Consumption taxes funded the federal government for, right up until the turn of the 20th century, and the income tax as we know it today didn't take effect until 1913 with the 16th Amendment, and even then, it took another 30 years or so before it really kicked in during World War II is when it really started touching Jane and Joe America, and before that it was really just a tax on the rich. The thing that's bothering people, the number one objection to the sales tax that is troubling people is this idea that a tax system has to be progressive. How do you build progressivity into a consumption tax where you go to the store, you buy $100 worth of goods or services, you pay a 15% tax, everybody pays the same 15%, and that is not a progressive tax. And those out there opposing the consumption tax would argue that it's a regressive tax, but it's not that either, Bob. It's a proportional tax. It falls on all income levels in proportion to their spending, right? High income people spend more money, so they pay more taxes. Lower income people spend less money, so they pay less taxes. It falls on all income levels in proportion to their either their luxury or their parsimony. Tony, whatever side of the ledger, you happen to fall on. And of course, it's a spectrum, right? There's not a line down the middle.
Right.
But the lower, the less amount of money you make, the less taxes you pay. And that's the way it should be. I mean, everybody has to have skin in the game when it comes to funding government and understanding the cost of government, because when you have skin in the game and you understand the cost of the government, you got a vested interest in keeping those costs down.
So from a revenue standpoint, you're talking about sales taxes, gas tax. What else are you talking about?
Well, we're talking about any consumption tax, Bob, is a point of purchase tax. So you've got just hit a couple of classic examples of the sales tax on goods and services at the store, and you've got gasoline taxes. Now, gasoline taxes are more of a manufacturer's excise tax than anything else, but it is by nature a consumption tax. And so if we're talking about using consumption taxes to fund the government, we're talking about a sales tax, retail sales tax on all consumption goods and services at the point of purchase.
So what's interesting is you wrote about the book you referred to a second ago, 1993, How to Fire the IRS. I bet they just loved you there. But how was that message received?
Well, at the time, it was received quite well. It was received quite with a great deal of excitement and energy, because the fact of the matter is that the idea of abolishing the income tax and the Internal Revenue Service appeals to a great number of people. And for good reason. People don't want to continue to bear the costs of compliance. They don't want to make the records, keep the records, deal with IRS enforcement, file the tax returns, go through all the agony of the compliance costs and compliance burdens that go along with this tax system. And you compare all of that with the simplicity and the efficiency of a national retail sales tax or any retail sales tax, it's just no comparison. The retail sales tax is much more simple. It's much more efficient. It's easy to understand. It's visible. Everybody knows what they're paying. It's very stable. Sales taxes very, very seldom change from year to year, whereas the income tax is changing constantly. We've got a tax code now that consists of more than 4 million words that have changed more than 6,000 times just since 2001 alone, and it is remarkably complex and remarkably unstable. And the first thing that every new Congress wants to do when they get involved, when they get seated, and the first thing every new president wants to do is change the doggone tax laws again. And so it's you compare that with a sales tax. In the state of Minnesota, for example, Bob, our state sales tax came into being in about 1963. You can count on one hand the number of changes that have occurred. I'm talking about significant changes in rates and scope and so on that have occurred with that law since 1963. It's stable. And the reason it's stable is because it's visible. And what I mean by visible is everybody knows what the rate of tax is. Everybody knows how much additional money is added on to your bill when you walk out of the store. If you buy $100 worth of goods and services and it's an 8% tax, the government costs you $8. And if it's a 28% tax, then they cost you $28. And everybody knows it. Everybody sees it. And so government can't blame the high cost of taxation on all these other non-factors. And it's easy to see that the high cost of taxation is directly relatable, directly attributable to government spending. And so this is why visible taxes are always much more stable than invisible taxes. Invisible taxes, like the income tax and particularly the Social Security tax, can be raised almost indiscriminately because you can blame other people for the cost of increases. And people just don't know how much government is costing them. People get tax refunds, Bob. They don't. The vast majority, about 85% of all Americans, don't write a check to the government. They have the money taken out of their paycheck, and most of those people get a refund. The vast majority of those people get a refund. They don't think they're paying any taxes. But the fact is, those are hidden taxes, and they're quite expensive and quite costly, and people don't know it.
Dan's website's taxhelponline.com. Great resource. Just about any problem that you could be dealing with the IRS and as well as effective tax strategies. You can go check out his website, taxhelponline.com. In your newsletter, Pilla Talks Taxes, you wrote about something that I don't think people who are having issues with the IRS have thought about. And the fact that you get a really big surprise if you think you're going overseas and you're going to need your passport, that your passport may not work. Talk a little bit about what's happening in that situation.
Yeah, well, what's happened, Bob, in the last several years is the IRS has gotten very aggressive about reporting citizens to the State Department who are seriously delinquent in their taxes. Now, this law was put on the books about 15 years ago, but they didn't do much with it until very recently. Now, if anybody owes more than the magic number is $64,000. If you owe more than $64,000 to the IRS, they can and will report you to the State Department as seriously delinquent. Now, the IRS doesn't have the power to revoke your passport. Only the State Department can handle passport issues. But what the IRS does is reports to the State Department that you're seriously delinquent in your tax liability, and the State Department then has the option, you might even argue the obligation, to either revoke or suspend your passport. And that's not people from traveling offshore. So Congress somehow got it on its head that this was going to be a good way to, another new way to squeeze people who are delinquent to try to get them to the table to get some resolution here.
So this may be a dumb question, but where did they come up with 64,000? That just seems like an awfully random number.
It is a random number, and here's where it comes from. The statute said 50,000. Anybody that owes more than 50,000, which is a little bit more of a round number, a little bit more of a rational target, but that number was indexed for inflation. All right, so as I said, this came on the books a number of years ago. They weren't doing much with it. Now they're doing a lot with it, and so that's why we've grown to $64,000. So 50 grand turned into 64,000 over the span of about 9 years.
Now, you do mention in your newsletter that a taxpayer who is on a payment plan, and make sure I got this right, would be exempt. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a number of exclusions in the statute, and this is one more reason why people need to take aggressive action. If you've got a tax delinquency that's weighing you down, you owe taxes that you can't pay, you're facing wage levies, bank levies, property liens, any of these things, or a threatened passport revocation, or you're concerned about a passport revocation, you got to take some affirmative action to get your problem resolved. Because if, for example, you're on an installment agreement to pay back the tax liability, the IRS, they can't report you as seriously delinquent. If you've got a pending collection due process appeal that's going on with the IRS, they can't report you. If you're in the process of negotiating an offer in compromise with the IRS or have an accepted offer in compromise, they can't report you as seriously delinquent. If your case has been closed, is currently not collectible. In other words, the IRS has made a finding that due to your financial circumstances, you're unable to make any payment, and so they close your case as a hardship. They can't report you as seriously delinquent. So there's a number of exceptions here that are very important that can only apply, Bob, when you as the citizen step forward to be aggressive about getting your situation resolved.
I know that you see this all the time. I've talked to more and more people who are mainly small business owners who are just having a tough time in all types of debt. And they have the problem, and I have a problem with the IRS. And the message that's so very important, you just said, is to make sure that they understand, hey, you've got to get that taken care of before you do anything.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And businesses that struggle with the IRS have just about exactly the same resolution strategies available to them, Bob, as an individual. So if you're a business and you've got employment tax delinquencies, for example, you've got penalty relief that's available to you. You got an offer in compromise that's available to you. We've even had cases closed as hardship not collectible in business situations. The offer in compromise strategy is available. All of these things are available to a business to negotiate negotiate settlements on business tax liabilities. So if the business is operating and you're facing employment taxes, there's things that we can do. If the business is closed down and the IRS has assessed those delinquent employment taxes against the business owners, that's called the trust fund recovery penalty assessment, that can be dealt with as well. So even if you are an individual who's been clobbered with these trust fund assessments, they can be negotiated through an offer in compromise or an installment agreement as well.
Once again, Dan's website is taxhelponline.com. Dan, always great to talk to you. Talk to you next month.
It's my pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Can't stress enough the importance of, if you you could have a lot of debt issues, the number one on that list has got to be the IRS and getting things taken care of. And the good news is that there are a lot of laws. There's a lot of laws that have been put on the books that are there to protect you and to give you due process and to give you some relief throughout the process of trying to get out of debt with the IRS. And what I've found is that people just don't know what's available to them to get help. And if you call the IRS, they're certainly not going to tell you. And one of the reasons why I love all the books that Dan has written, because he's put it all in book form, every solution that you could possibly need. So you can go check that out at taxhelponline.com. And a lot of free information on that website, taxhelponline.com. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.